All right, welcome to Touchdown Talks. I'm Spencer Taylor. This is going to be a video of me making some adjustments to a predictions video that I made before the season started for the NFL, where I predicted every single team, every single game, their full records, did playoff predictions, all that. You can see that on my channel. I'll have it linked in a card and elsewhere on this video. This video is going to be my response to, some things going in an unforeseen way, in ways that were unforeseen to me anyways, and I'm making adjustments to my predictions part way through the season. Now, of course, those preseason predictions, I'm still going to count those. I'll still, as the season goes along, I'll still make reference to those. And, when the season's over, I'll still be curious to see how my preseason predictions went out. There's a handful of teams, especially in the AFC and in the AFC South, that are making me feel like, it's kind of silly at this point to even bother too much, paying too much attention to my preseason predictions on those teams. Okay, so what you're going to see here now on your screen might look a little bit intimidating. My apologies. I know it's not the most pleasant of presentations to look at, but this is a spreadsheet where I keep track of all my predictions from the preseason. Down here, you'll see I have preseason predictions. You'll see I have what I'm calling currently, just have it titled as early change predictions. And then down here, I have a tab that's not used currently, but it will be here in about another month or so. So you'll see right above my webcam here, I've got 3 rows here that are highlighted. So you'll see this chart, especially right here, just focus mainly in this part of the table. And, to make it easier, I will add some borders for us, just to make it slightly easier to focus on these. This chart is the full NFL season for every single team mapped out in a simple spreadsheet. So we've got the weeks up here, and then we've got the teams, of course, all in their abbreviations. So, you can understand which team is which by that. Over here is the record that I had predicted for each team before the season started. This record right here is what they would be based off of what I've gotten wrong or right so far. So, basically what this spreadsheet looks like at the beginning of the season, when I've made these predictions, you can check and see this on my predictions video from the beginning. Wins I mark as green, and then red I mark as red. It represents losses. So when I'm making the predictions, those are the colors I assign. And then I have some colors that are, not quite as primary, maybe not as beautiful as, black and white to look at. But then as each week goes on, I change those colors to signify, okay, was this a win that I predicted or a loss, and was I right or wrong? So, and I've got a little bit of a key down here. So you can see, for example, this light blue sort of teal color for Washington in week 1. That was because I had marked it as green. I had marked it as the Commanders winning it, and I was correct on that. They won. However, in week 1 for the Seahawks, I had predicted that they were going to win against the 49ers. They did not. So instead, so that one gets changed to this, purple pink color. And then similar, you can see this for the rest of the table. And then, of course, previous seasons, I haven't had to use this since I started doing these predictions, but this year had to come up with this, basically just 2 different shades of gray for a tie, and basically whether or not I had originally predicted the team to win or lose. But I digress a little bit here. This is the main thing we're going to focus on here today in this video. And again, these adjusted records based off of predictions, and then this will become irrelevant here because this sheet is no longer, this currently is just a copy of this sheet, but we're going to adjust this, so this is going to soon be irrelevant here. But yeah, we'll leave that there because that's not what we're going to focus on in this video. We're mainly going to focus on just these specific 5 teams. So I've got the Jaguars, the Colts, the Texans, the Bengals, and the Ravens. These are the 5 teams in the AFC that I want to focus on the most. And of course, as I go through the remainder of each 5 teams' schedules, things are going to change for other teams as well as I flip wins and losses based off of what I'm seeing right now. So to start it off, and you'll notice I also have colors here. These I just added for the video's purposes here, and basically kind of where I'm leaning with each of these teams. With Baltimore and Cincinnati, I've got these 2 in red because these are 2 teams that the adjustments I'm going to be making are somewhat negative, and because I'm very concerned about each team, and I think they're going to be worse than what I had originally predicted. Yellow with the Texans is kind of, I'm going to look at making some changes. I'm not 100% sure where I'm going to go on them. And then, of course, on the opposite end, Jaguars and the Colts, especially the Colts. I expect I'm going to flip a lot of these games here that I had predicted them to lose. As you can see, before the season, I thought the Colts were going to be a 2-15 team. Woefully wrong. So that is why we were going to change that. And sure, Colts fans, make fun of me all you want during the season about my preseason predictions, but hey, I'm trying to make right on it. I'm trying to put some respect on your team. Daniel Jones, all that, the whole roster, the coaching staff. I think they're doing really good. And so yeah, want to give them some flowers here in this video. So we'll start off with them because this is the Colts. Let's be real, the Colts are really the team that's inspired this. I've been hinting at making this video for a couple weeks now. So let's get into it. So for the Colts, this upcoming week in week 6, they will be hosting the Arizona Cardinals. You will see this is actually a game that I had predicted before the season started that the Colts would win. I'm not going to change that. The Cardinals are a team that is, the Cardinals are struggling. They're finding goofy ways to lose. So I'm not going to change that one. And then on the road the next week against the Chargers. Now, this one's still an interesting one. I think this one could be a close, good game. But the way the Chargers have been playing recently, especially with the injuries they've had, I'm pretty concerned about the Chargers. I'm not going to I'm not focusing on the Chargers this video. I predicted them to go 11-6 at the beginning of the season based off of what I've gotten wrong and what I got right. Because basically, I had picked the Chargers to lose these 2 games. I had picked them to win those. So I've been wrong on 4 out of the 5 games for the Chargers, but they kind of canceled each other out. So currently, based off of the games that have flipped for the Chargers, I'm still at the same point. I kind of think the Chargers still have a chance to go 11-6, but I think we're going to end up impacting that here because, starting it off again right here, this would be week 7 in a couple weeks from now. The Colts going to LA to face the Chargers, which is interesting. This is going to be the second time this season that the Colts are going to SoFi Stadium, being that they were just there against the Rams a couple weeks ago. They won that game as well. They did lose that game. That's the one loss that the Colts have is against the Rams in LA. But in week 7 going up against the Chargers, I think it's going to be a different story. This Chargers team is very depleted on the offensive line, which is the last couple weeks against the Giants and against Washington has really hurt the Chargers. It's hurt their ability to protect Justin Herbert, and it's hurt their ability to run the ball. And on top of that, compounding with that, they've lost Omarion Hampton to an injury. He's on injured reserve now. The reporting isn't that he's going to miss the whole season for the Chargers, but Hampton is going to be out for at least 4 weeks, being on injured reserve. So they'll be without their starting running back. And so I do think this one's going to change here. So we will flip the Colts to winning this one and here we'll flip this one to red. So that's kind of what I'm going to be doing here. But so for the Colts, that's already an extra win, and I do want to adjust these. So Chargers, they would go to 10-7 based off these predictions, and that would bring the Colts up to. I'm sorry. What I should do is we'll adjust this number right here. So 10-7 for the Chargers, and then this will bring the Colts up to 7-10. Still not a great record, but again, as you can see, just simply them proving me wrong 4 weeks out of 5 so far. They bumped themselves already up from that 2-5, 2-15 to 16 and 6-11. So I'm already changing that even more, and we're going to keep going here with the Colts. I think they win it on the road against the Chargers. Then they come home against the Titans. They've already beaten the Titans on the road. I think they're going to go ahead and beat the Titans again. Titans, one of the worst teams in the league, if not the worst. Again, did get a scrappy win this past Sunday, but it was against the Cardinals, who found the dumbest ways to lose that game. Then on the road against the Pittsburgh Steelers for the Colts. This one's actually a surprisingly interesting game. This is a game that, coming into the season, would not have been anticipated to be very exciting. I'm sure during the preseason, my predictions, I probably barely even mentioned this game because this is not one that was on my radar as being interesting. It's not in a primetime slot. It's going to be a Sunday early slate game. It'll be, again, in Pittsburgh, and it'll be on CBS. I wouldn't even be surprised if this game maybe gets flexed to later in the Sunday schedule. But if not, I wouldn't be surprised to see CBS put Jim Nantz and Tony Romo on this game because, these two teams, the Steelers and the Colts, are two teams that are 4-1 and 3-1 currently, respectively, and both teams surprisingly good so far. The Steelers, that's another thing. The Steelers, I considered talking about them this video, but I'm not going to. I do think I'm probably wrong on the Steelers. They're going to be better than either of these two records here, but I'm not going to change my predictions on the Steelers till mid-season. I'll leave them till then. But for this game, it will be in Pittsburgh. Colts going in there. I'm going to leave this as a win for the Steelers. It'll be in their home. It'll be outdoors. We'll be at that point. We'll be at the beginning of November. So weather might still be okay, and it'll be an early time game in the sun, so it'll be fine. But not indoors. And it will be in Pittsburgh, which again is still a very beloved franchise, great fan base. So that's a game that I could see the Colts losing it. Assuming there's not any crazy injuries between now and then to Aaron Rodgers or other key players for the Steelers, I could see the Steelers getting the win here. And then we move on to Week 10 for the Colts, and that would be on the road in Europe, as a matter of fact. It's marked as a home game for the Colts, but it's not going to be a real home game. They're going to be going international in Europe, in Berlin, as a matter of fact, and they will be playing the Falcons. So this will be an international game. It'll, so that's always an interesting element. Makes things a little bit tough to predict as far as that goes. If we look at the Falcons before that, they will have just been coming off of playing on the road against New England. So, tough stretch, tough 2 weeks here for the Falcons. They'll be on the road in New England, and then they'll be going straight to Berlin. So, and New England's looking pretty scrappy as well at the moment. So, I think the Colts are going to come in and win this game. The Falcons haven't been looking that great. I don't know, the Falcons are hard to read. They've won some games I wasn't expecting, but I mean, you'll see here. I mean, actually, yeah, I mean, I predicted the Falcons' first two games correctly. Weeks 3 and 4, I was wrong on both, and so they canceled out. But yeah, I think the Colts are a much better team than the Falcons at this point. So I'm going to flip this. It's a loss for the Falcons, a win for the Colts. So that'll bring the Colts number up to 8-9 and bring the Falcons number down to 7-10 for my predictions. So then after that, in Berlin, that is one nice thing for the Colts is they travel to Berlin. They'll have this game. Again, I'm predicting they'll win it, and they'll go into their bye week, with a really good record, only 2 losses to their name. They'll be 8-2 going into their bye week, and they'll have an extra week to get back, get rested, and prepare for a pretty daunting stretch coming in the late part of the season. I will say that about the Colts' schedule is the latter part of this is pretty daunting looking, but I think they're going to win some of these games here. So at the Chiefs, they'll be coming up again. Colts will be coming off a bye here, and the Chiefs will actually just be coming off of a game against the Broncos. So that'll be a division rivalry game. And as you can see here, I've got the Chiefs losing that game, which, I mean, at this point, with the way the Chiefs are playing, Chiefs still scrappy team. I think, they should have Rashee Rice back at that point. So I certainly still think the Chiefs are a good team. I think they're going to be in the playoff race, even if it is in the wild card race for once. But I don't know. This is a tough spot. The Colts at the Chiefs. It will be in Arrowhead. So I'm tempted to give this one to the Chiefs, but it's tough. I mean, I don't expect the Colts to win all of these games here, and they won't need to make it to the playoffs. So I'm going to leave the Chiefs game here. I'm going to say that they win this one, I'm going to say that the Chiefs beat the Colts here. And then for the next week for the Colts, they host the Texans. And I'm going to say that this one at home, coming off a loss to the Chiefs, maybe it's a very close, semi-high scoring game, similar to this game that we just had between the Jaguars and the Chiefs. I expect it to be a close one. So coming off that loss against the Chiefs, I see the Colts bouncing back, fighting hard against a division rival at home in Indianapolis, and they get the win here. So that'll flip this for these two teams. That would take my prediction for the Colts to 9-8, and the prediction for the Texans to 10-7. And then from there, we move on to the next week for the Colts. That'll be against the Jaguars. So, tough stretch. Again, a very tough stretch here for the Colts. Now, for the Colts on this one, they go on the road against Jacksonville. And I don't know. This is tough. The Jaguars are, with the win they just had against the Chiefs, I'm struggling to not put too much faith into the Jaguars. I don't want to be falling victim to recency bias based off of that. One thing I will highlight with the Jaguars' schedule is they have faced some weaker opponents here. They played against the Panthers and won, played against the Bengals and lost. To be fair, that was when the Bengals still had Joe Burrow, at least a bit. I mean, the Bengals were still kind of struggling even when he was in, but certainly a lot better than the Bengals are at the moment. And then, they won against the Texans, who, through the first 3 weeks, the Texans were looking really bad. And then, they've now won against the 49ers, who, that one was a close one. The 49ers didn't play very well. They're very banged up. So the Jags were just barely able to come out with the win on that one. But still credit to them on this one, especially. And then the win against the Chiefs at home, this is the statement win so far for the Jags. So, again, some good stuff so far from the Jags. But as far as this game between the Jaguars and the Colts, I think I'll leave this the same. Jags Colts, they do have 2 games in this stretch against each other. So I'm going to leave this one in Jacksonville as a win for the Jags. Moving on to Week 15 for the Colts, though, they go on the road to Seattle, who is another team that I think I was a bit low on. Again, I'm going to save changing my predictions for them until the midseason, which is going to mean I'm going to be wrong for a while. Well, I don't know. These are bad enough. I might change this for the Seahawks as well. Let's mark them as yellow just live here. My apologies if this video goes long. Feel free to hit timestamps, skip around to whatever you want in this video. I'll try to mark, what teams I'm focusing on at what points in the video for you. But so let's finish off with the Colts really quick, though. So they go to Seattle. The Seahawks, they've got a great defense. They've got an offense that is, very much like the Vikings of last year, especially in the fact that they have Sam Darnold, who, was surprisingly good last year and has continued to look like his same self this year now with the Seahawks. He hasn't gone pumpkin mode or anything. And yeah, the Seahawks are playing good football. They did just lose to the Buccaneers, but that's another team that I think is really good in the NFL. That's a team that coming into the season, I had them predicted as, I've got the Buccaneers as a playoff team. So, for the Seahawks to have lost that game, I'm not too worried about. I think the Seahawks are going to be a good one. So I am going to leave this one as the Seahawks winning this at home. All these games right here that I've got still staying as losses for the Colts, I think the Colts are going to play a lot of teams close if they do lose. They're either going to, that's the thing so far with the Colts. They've been beating up on some teams, and then even the game that they did lose in the Rams, it was a pretty tight game. So, and I expect that to stay the same for the Colts. And, barring any crazy injuries, I think the Colts are a very for real team. Very scary, especially at the moment. So I'm going to keep these games as losses for the Colts. But this is where I'm going to start changing things. At home against the 49ers, I think the Colts are going to win this game. Maybe handily. It's going to depend on the health of the 49ers at that point. I have no idea who's going to be playing quarterback. I have no idea what receivers or weapons are going to be healthy for the 49ers. Of course, every team this far in advance, it's a huge question. It is football, and it is the NFL, so injuries happen all the time. So things could change for either team, but I certainly trust the health of the Colts right now more than I do the 49ers, who are a franchise that seems pretty cursed when it comes to injuries. So we'll make that change, and I will say that the Colts get the win against the 49ers, which brings my prediction for the 49ers back down to 11-6 with that game change. Colts now up to 10-7 with that game changing. And then now the rematch of Colts-Jaguars. And this is the game that I will flip. At home, I'm going to give the Jaguars the win. So I'm basically for the Jaguars-Colts rivalry. Coming into the season, I had the Jaguars sweeping the Colts. I no longer do. I'm going to mark it as the two rivals splitting the series between them this season. So that will bring the Colts up to 11-6 and drop the Jaguars, at least for right now, without changing anything else to the Jaguars, to 9-8. I think there may be some other changes I need to make to the Jaguars predictions here in just a second that'll maybe help with that. But that series and at least getting a win against the Jaguars, I think may end up being very important for this playoff race, because for these for these three teams here in the AFC South, they're the ones that I believe are going to be in the race for, of course, winning the division and even getting in with a playoff or with a wild card. I wouldn't be surprised if the AFC South has a wild card team this year. Which again is crazy. This has been a division that at least the last couple of years, it's just been the Texans getting in with like the 4th seed, and that's about it. And the rest of the division has been garbage. And a few years ago you had some playoff appearances, like one playoff appearance from the Jags and stuff like that, but then they've kind of fallen off. So, but again, this division, it's awakened this year in 2025. So yeah, again, I've got the Colts winning against the Jags in Week 7, and then for the final week on the road against the Texans. This one's a tough one. It'll be indoors. Again, a lot of questions. It's going to very much come down to who's healthier at this point. Have the Texans got things going on offense? Have they figured out, is their offensive line doing better? But I don't really trust the Texans to be healthy or to be doing that well. The Texans, they've got a good defense, especially up front. But on offense, I'm still not sure that I'm a big believer in the Texans' offensive line. Again, C.J. Stroud still, he's looked better certainly this last couple weeks, but he hasn't looked like his rookie self basically in the last, year plus 3 games this season. And the Texans have had a tough schedule, but they've also, one of their wins. Well, yeah, both of their wins come against the Texans and a Ravens team that is, very much hurting. So for the Colts, I'm going to change this to a win. I've got the Colts sweeping the Texans this year. That might be a little rich, might be a little bit of recency bias, but, even if maybe this ends up making me slightly wrong on the Texans here, I'm willing to do it for adjusting my picks for the Colts here. I think the Colts are, again, I picked them to go 2-15. I'm now at the moment predicting them to go 12-5, so that's a difference of 10 games. But I mean, I believe that may be real. Last year with the Vikings, the Colts this year are my 2024 Vikings. It was a very similar story last year. Vikings fans, especially some of you who are subscribed from last year, you can attest. I had the Vikings going into 2024 as a bottom tier team. I had them winning not very many games at all. I can't remember exactly what the number was, but I made adjustments to my predictions for them mid-season, and even that I was slightly short on. I made adjustments enough to say, hey, I think they're going to make it into the playoffs, but I think when I adjusted my predictions, I got them to like 10 wins or something, and they outperformed even that. So this time I'm not going to go quite as conservative with my adjustments. I'm giving the Colts that much of a bump, which coming to the season, I should say this column here is the win total odds set up by sportsbooks. So coming into the season, depending on the sportsbook you checked, the number was either, was anywhere from 7.5 to 9.5. So I'm going from taking the under on those to taking the over. So a lot of respect for the Colts. Next, let's go to the Jaguars. So the Jaguars next are going to be hosting the Seahawks. This one's a tough one. I may have to switch this one to a loss for the Jags. This one's one that I could see the Jags proving me wrong on. It is in Jacksonville, and it is going to be a cross-country trip for the Seahawks. I don't know. Maybe I leave this one the same. This one's going to be a tough one, but I just feel like for the Jags, you're coming off a Monday night game, so that is one thing for the Jaguars and Seahawks. The Seahawks are going to be on 1 day's extra rest. I guess both teams are coming off of pretty close games. However, for the Seahawks, I feel like they might be coming off of this very close loss to the Buccaneers, feeling pissed, feeling upset that they let that game get away at home. They're going to be traveling to Florida to play a different good Florida team in the Jaguars. So I think the Seahawks are going to come into this wanting to get redemption from what they just had. Jaguars 1 day less of rest, coming off of a really good win, close win against the Chiefs at home. Where Trevor Lawrence balled out, but also the Jaguars, again, they did make some mistakes, and also they won really thanks to a lot of mistakes that the Chiefs made. So I'm going to say that this is actually a loss for the Jaguars, win for the Seahawks. So that'll move the Jaguars to 10-7, and the Seahawks to 9-8. And then moving on for the Jaguars, this will be an international game for the Jaguars against the Rams. This will be in London. And this one's a tough one. I've got a little bit more faith in the Rams for this game, so I'm going to give this one to the Rams. But for the Jaguars, you'll be going into your bye week, so that'll be a nice thing. You'll be coming off of a pretty decent beginning to the season. If this ends up holding true, the Jaguars will have gone 4-3 going into their bye. Being that they're 4-1 right now, maybe a little disrespectful that I've got them losing the next two games, but it's a tough stretch for the Jaguars here. But they'll get a bye, and then they've got some more winnable games coming up after. So then after the bye week for the Jags, you go on the road against the Raiders. It is on the road, but I have no faith right now in the Raiders at this point. Maybe by this point the Raiders have changed quarterbacks, but none of the backups that the quarterbacks or that the Raiders have give me any hope for them, really. The Raiders are really one of the worst teams in the league this year, and surprisingly so. I thought the Raiders were going to be maybe somewhat middling here, but I don't anymore. So that change there for the Jaguars puts the Jaguars at 11-6, brings the Raiders down to 5-12 in my predictions. So after that win on the road, they would then go on the road again against the Texans. I'm going to say the Texans win this one at home. And the Jaguars have already beat the Texans, so it is possible that they win again, but it's a rivalry. I think the Texans are going to be looking a little bit better in the midseason than what they were, and again, they'll be at home. So I think they get the win here. Jaguars hosting the Chargers. This one, I lean towards wanting to change this one, because certainly right now, the way things look for the Jags, you know what? Yeah, this is going to be in Duval. I'm going to give it to him. I'm not quite out yet on the Chargers yet. So I don't want to change too much for the Chargers, but I will change that one. So Jags 12-5, Chargers sitting now at 9-8 in these new predictions. Jaguars would then go on the road against the Cardinals, win that one, and then following that on the road against the Titans, I'm going to give them the win here. I think the Titans are again, the Titans I think are bad. Bad coaching. I shouldn't even really say I think. Cam Ward has shown some flashes, certainly, but the Titans are not a very well-coached team. Again, they got out of Arizona with a win on the skin of their teeth, thanks to the Cardinals really blowing that game with some boneheaded mistakes. And so, yeah, I'm going to change that. So, I mean, that brings my Jaguars prediction up to 13-4, which I think is a little rich. Yeah, you know what? Upsets happen. I'm going to leave that one as it originally was. I'm going to say this still ends up being an upset, an upset win for the Titans. I mean, again, they just got an upset win against the Cardinals. I do think the Titans are a bad team, but I still think they're going to be one of those teams that is going to scrap together a win here or there. They're going to upset some people. So yeah, I'm going to have the Jags still losing this, and I'm going to leave the rest of their schedule the same. Again, Indy, I already covered that between the two teams. On the road against the Jets, sure, you get the win. At home against the Jets. On the road against the Broncos, this is a team. I think the Broncos. The Broncos are really in polling position to win the NFC West at this moment. So, current standings wise, the leader for the for the AFC West, currently the leader is actually the Chargers, but they are tied with the Broncos. So, and I've got a lot more concerns with the Chargers injury wise and things like that. I think they're going to drop some games. So I think it's going to be the Broncos really in pole position for the NFC West. So I think that's going to be a tough one for the Jags to win on the road in Mile High in Denver. So, and then again, Colts, and then last game of the year against the Titans, they'll be packing it up at that point. Sure, the Titans may play scrappy in the final week of the season, but it'll be in Jacksonville. The Jags will have more to play for as far as playoff seeding. And again, Titans will be planning their vacations, and the organization will be prepping for off-season changes and for the draft. So that'll be my change for the Jaguars. They now sit at 12-5, which, interestingly enough, I now would have the Colts and the Jags both finishing at 12-5. So, do I really think their exact records are going to be exactly this? I don't know. Not confident that they're really going to end in a tie like that. But I think both of these two AFC South teams have a chance to be double-digit win teams. Really quick, let's check the Texans now. So they're going into their bye week right now. Then they'll be on the road against Seattle, which is a tough one. I don't see them winning that against the Seahawks. So I'm going to flip that one. So that's one more loss for the Texans, one more win for the Seahawks. That brings the Seahawks up to 10-7, brings the Texans down to 8-9 for now. But then they host the 49ers. I already had them winning it. I'm going to leave that the same. And then for the Broncos, then hosting the Broncos, Texans have a 3-game home stretch, so that's pretty interesting and nice for them here. They'll be hosting the Broncos. That'll be a tough one. I think that one will be one that they drop at home. So that'll give a win to the Broncos. Wrong one right there. Or wait. Yeah. I was right. Okay. So that flips to a win for the Broncos. So that would put my prediction for the Broncos at 13-4 and bring my prediction for the Texans down to 7-10. But then, going through the rest of the games, home against Jacksonville, I'll give them the win there. On the road against the Titans, I'll give the Texans the win here. So that'll bring Texans back up to 8-9. Bring the Titans down to 4-13. And then for the Texans, you'll be at home against Buffalo. That's a tough one. I don't know that I really think the Texans are going to win this one. And again, this is why I had the Texans in yellow, because I did want to take another look at their schedule, and I do think they feel alive, again, in the sense of, for once we have 3 teams in the AFC South that feel alive enough, and the Texans at least alive in the sense that they have been the winner of this division in recent years. So that's, really the reason to have belief in them, but I think this is a down year for the Texans, though. And I know we did just see the Bills lose this week as of when I'm recording this to the Patriots, but that was a rivalry game for the Bills. Sure, the Bills are human; they're not perfect, but this will be in Buffalo, late season game. I don't know that it'll necessarily be. This is at home for the Texans. This will be in Houston, indoors, which does help Houston. That's interesting. I'm still going to mark this as a loss for the Texans, though. Again, I still have too many concerns for the Texans health-wise, and for the offensive line especially, and for that offense's production. So that would bring Texans back down to 7-10. Would bring Bills up to 14-3, and then moving out of that, at the Colts, I think you lose that one. At the Chiefs, that's a tough stretch right here. I think you do go back home. You host the Cardinals, win. Host the Raiders, you win that one as well. Who knows? Maybe the Raiders find a way to get an upset win there, but I'm going to give that one to the Texans. Raiders really falling down in my predictions here, but when Geno Smith is your quarterback who leads the NFL in interceptions with 9 right now, the Raiders just don't seem to have any better options really to go to for backup quarterbacks. So, even quarterbacks that they could bring in. So after that switches for the Texans on the road against the Chargers, I'll still leave that as a win. And then at home against the Colts, and I think the Colts win that here. So my prediction for the Texans is that they finish 8-9 for the season. That would have them missing the playoffs, certainly. They'll finish third in their division. So certainly a down year for the Texans, but being that it's a year where I believe both the Colts and the Jags will have had a bit of a resurgence, kind of makes sense that the Texans take a step back. They've got a lot of personal issues on their team as far as just holes and stuff that they have. So it would make sense that Texans very well may end up being the third team in the division. So let's move into the other team I had marked yellow for the Seahawks. So you're on the road against the Jags, at home against Houston. We already went over those. Then you have a bye. You go into your bye with a pretty good record. Then you're on the road against the Commanders. which I had as a loss. I'm still going to leave it as that because I think the Commanders, they've had some early struggles, but they just got Jaden Daniels back, and they just beat the Chargers, who, again, I know the Chargers are having it rough with injuries, but the Commanders handled them pretty well. So I'll leave it as, I'll leave it as the Chargers beat the Seahawks. Or sorry, the Commanders beat the Seahawks. Seahawks then host the Cardinals, win on the road against the Rams. I'll say they lose this one. I already have them and the Rams splitting the division rivalry between the two. I'm going to keep that the same. A loss on the road against the Titans, I don't think so. Certainly maybe a trap game spot, but I'm not going to be predicting that. So Seahawks get the win. Titans take another loss. Seahawks record prediction goes up to 11-6. Titans fall to 3-14. And then after the Titans, the Seahawks will get Minnesota at home. Minnesota, I don't really know what to do with Minnesota at the moment. Which again is funny, being that I was wrong with them early on in the season last year. But I'm not going to change much with these predictions for the Vikings. As you can see, yes, I've gotten games wrong. I've gotten 2 of their games wrong, but the way I got them wrong canceled out. And I still think this Vikings team, they have a really good roster. And Kevin O'Connell, to his credit, he's made even Carson Wentz this year look, like his old self when he was doing good with the Eagles back in the day. Whether they end up going back to J.J. McCarthy this season when he's healthy or not, I don't know. But the rest of the roster for the Vikings is really good. So I still think they're, a wild card team, a fringe playoff team. So I'm not going to change anything there for this game. I'll still say that Seahawks lose this one against the Vikings. That one should be a pretty interesting one. But I certainly could see the Seahawks flipping that one. It will be the Seahawks at home, and it will have the revenge angle of Sam Darnold going back to the, playing the Vikings again and saying, hey, well, you should have kept me. So that angle on it would be interesting. I'm almost tempted to flip it. I'm going to leave it, though. Again, I think the Seahawks will be favored going into this game, but I think the line will be pretty close. And again, upsets happen. So I'm going to say this is maybe an upset win for the Vikings. Then the Seahawks go on the road against the Falcons. I think this is one the Seahawks get a win on. They flip that game. Falcons, I just don't have a ton of faith in at the moment. We'll flip that. And the Seahawks go to 12-5. And then, the rest of the way, again, I left it the same for the Colts Seahawks. This will be in Seattle. Then you're in Seattle against the Rams. Then you're on the road against the against the Panthers in Carolina. And then at San Francisco. So 2 road games to end the season. That's kind of rough for 49ers or for Seahawks fans. You got to get your last home game in a little bit earlier there, but of course this is also during the holiday season right in here, but I think the Seahawks I'll say the Seahawks win out here. They lose against the Vikings and win out the rest of the way. Seahawks finish 12-5. I think they're I think they're in the race to win their division. I think the Rams are going to be their highest competition, but I think the Rams have a tough schedule coming up. And I just, with the Rams, I think there could be some concern. But I think the NFC West, it's going to be between the Seahawks, the Rams, and the 49ers, with the Rams and the Seahawks being the two teams I have the most confidence in this year. But yeah, so Seahawks, my prediction changes to 12-5. Interesting that so far these three teams, I've got them all going 12-5 now. That's probably a bad sign. These are going to be probably bad predictions, but this is for fun anyways. We'll see. Maybe I'll be right on all these. For the final two teams, the ones that I'm going to have to make some negative adjustments for. Let's start with the Bengals. This is going to be tough. I don't really know what games to give them wins on. Certainly in the next few weeks before their bye week, I can't see them winning really any game. They're on the road against the Packers. I already had them losing that. Then they'll be at home against the Steelers. It is an AFC North rivalry matchup. Those can often be very interesting, very close. But just the way the Steelers are playing right now versus how the Bengals are playing right now, I can't give that to the Bengals. Even though it'll be in Cincinnati, that doesn't really matter right now. I mean, Bengals fans at this point are wearing bags on their heads and, getting frustrated. From fans to even players, it's hard to not be frustrated if you're a Bengal right now. So that one changes in the negative for them. That gives another win for the Steelers. And then, so after that game, you're at home against the Jets. That's a tough one. The Jets are another really bad team. They're 0-5 right now. I've got them losing this upcoming week against the Broncos. And then a win against the Panthers, which I don't even know if they're going to do that. But again, I'm not changing the Jets predictions too much right now. I'm going to still say that this is the first game that, from when I'm recording this, I'm going to say that this is the first game that the Bengals figure out a way to win. And it will be at home. Now, Bengals playing at home in Cincinnati against my Chicago Bears. Now, this one's a tough one. Because obviously, as a Chicago Bears fan, I want to give the Bears the win here. And I also don't really want to change my predictions with the Bears, just because of the fact that I have been completely perfect with my Bears predictions so far. So, but there are some games with the Bears that I, considering flipping as well. But I'd kind of like to save that for another video. So for right now, I will still say that I'm going to say that the Bengals find a way to win here. I might have a video, soon, in a week or two. I'll probably just wait for the Bears to change anything predictions-wise till mid-season. Chances are I'll have gotten at least one of these games wrong, if not a couple. But this is tough. Yeah, Bears stuff. I mean, I've been perfect so far picking the Bears. I got their 2 losses right, their 2 wins right. And I think some of these in here will look pretty surprising to you, but I still think some of these are very possible for the Bears. For the Bengals, again, you host both. I mean, you have a 3-game home stretch and then a bye. And so, some upset wins here against the Jets and the Bears. I wouldn't be too surprised. So I'm going to give those to. I'm going to keep those as wins for the Bengals. And then you have a road game in Pittsburgh after your bye. I'm going to keep that as a loss for the Bengals. And then you have a home game against the Patriots. Now, the thing is, as I get into this portion of the schedule for the Bengals, is I don't know when Joe Burrow is going to come back. The status on his injury was, when he got hurt, was that he was going to miss close to 3 months, 2 to 3 months. But the reporting was that they expected that, there was at least a hope of Burrow being able to come back, by like late November or December or something like that. So, that would mean somewhere in here, Joe Burrow may be back, and that changes things a little bit for the Bengals. Of course, it also depends on how out of it they are at that point. So for this game here, though, I'm going to say that I'm going to keep this one. This is another one for the Bengals. I'm going to keep this one as a win. And then you're at Baltimore. I think by this point, Baltimore is going to have a few things figured out. I think Baltimore is going to win this one. Baltimore is going to win this one. And I don't know that I'm confident that Joe Burrow is going to be back by that point. So we will flip those. So Baltimore 10-7 there. And then for the Bengals 8-9 at that with that adjustment. And then you go on the road against the Bills. On the road against the Steelers, home against the Patriots, on the road against the Ravens, on the road against the Bills, at home against the Ravens. That is a daunting stretch of 5 games there for the Bengals. Even though the Ravens aren't looking that great right now, they should have Lamar Jackson back healthy. The Ravens are currently going into their bye week. That's plenty enough time that I expect the Ravens to have at least figured some things out on offense. And their defense, if they're able to get a couple players back healthy, I still don't expect the Ravens defense to be very good at this point this year. But I think the Ravens are going to have figured some things out to where they're going to be really pushing to get themselves into the playoffs. This is a tough stretch. I think the rest of this I'm pretty much going to leave the same for the Bengals. They lose out here. They lose 4 out of 5 games here, and then I'm going to say right around here is where Joe Burrow comes back. And they also have some easier games to finish out the season. So they get 3 wins to end it out. They get to a record of 8-9. That'll have them eliminated from the playoffs, before this game, possibly even before this game happens. But chances are they'll be eliminated in week 17 at that point. But so that's really all that I'm going to change for the Bengals. Lastly, with the Ravens, I don't know what the deal is going to be for the Ravens. As I said, I made the mistake a second ago of saying the Ravens are going into their bye week. They're close. The Ravens do actually play against the Rams first this upcoming week. So, and I had that as a win for the Ravens. I do not currently have that. I think the Rams are going to win that one. It is going to be an interesting game. I know that one's going to be on Fox. So that one should be an entertaining one, but I've got the Rams winning that one. I mean, again, I do think the Ravens are going to turn things around a little bit, at least on offense, but I don't think they're quite there yet. I think the Ravens are going to need their bye to do that first. So Rams, that changes their prediction to 10-7. And then that changes my Ravens to 9-8 for the minute. Then the Ravens go into their bye. Then they host the Bears. I do think they'll still win that one against the Bears. That one will be a tough one on the road in Baltimore. This Bears team, I do think they're going to be showing some progress as they already have. But, there's still some things they need to, it's going to be a progression with the Bears. And so I think on the road, Also the Bears have been a very bad road team in recent years, so I think this is going to be one where, even though the Ravens defense is struggling, I think this game, because of that, I think this game could be a shootout. But I think the Ravens find a way to win this one. But I don't know. This could be an upset win for the Bears. Either of these two either of these two games that I have marked as losses for the Bears, of course, because I was expecting before the season that Lamar would be healthy and playing good, and similar with the Bengals and Joe Burrow. I could see one of these two games flipping for the Bears. But again, for now, I'm going to leave those the same. And then on the road in Miami for the Ravens, I think the Ravens get the win here. It will be in Miami, so depending on the weather, that could maybe be slightly helpful to the Dolphins. But they're without Tyreek Hill. Their coach is looking pretty sad and depressed at this point. It seems like, obviously it's pretty obvious that the writing is on the wall for him and that team. I don't think the Dolphins are going anywhere. They're looking really bad. So we'll flip that one for the Ravens. And for the Dolphins, that would drop them to 5-12 in my predictions for them. And then Ravens go on the road against the Vikings. I think they lose that one. Go on the road against the Browns. That one is a interesting one. The Ravens did beat the Browns already this season, and it was at home. Now, the Browns, the interesting thing is even though they're not a great team, they've certainly looked a lot better when they've been at home and or outdoors. And I still don't, again, I have concerns about the Ravens offense and certainly their defense. And with the Browns, at least their defense is looking really good. So I think this is going to be a low scoring, defensive matchup in Cleveland. And I think the Browns get the win here. I'm sure the Browns will probably even be underdogs in this game at home, but I think the Browns get the win in that one. So yeah, that drops the Ravens once again back down to 9-8. And then, you go to the Jets, get a win. Bengals at home against the Steelers. Again, I'll say by this point, you've kind of righted the ship in these two games. Then you host the Steelers. You're able to win in a close one at home. On the road against the Bengals, again, I just, Bengals, I don't think their defense is also horrible. Their offensive line is horrible. I think, for both the Ravens and for the Bengals, their coaches on some hot seats, but certainly the hot seat for the Bengals head coach is much hotter than it is for John Harbaugh, who is one of the longest tenured coaches who is very long tenured coach, basically been the Ravens coach basically my whole life. So even though the hot seat is getting hotter for him, partially because of that, I don't see the Ravens firing him after this year. And yeah, I think the Bengals are a worse team than the Ravens when all is said and done. So I think the Ravens will sweep the Bengals, which is tough to say. Again, it is an AFC North matchup, which I do respect those rivalries as being close. But I would say this one in Cincinnati will hinge on which quarterbacks are healthy or not. But I'm more confident in Lamar being healthy for that game at that point. But really tough to say. Then you host the Patriots. It's honestly tempting to give this one to the Patriots. Because I think the Patriots are real. I already have, I had them at 11-6 coming into the season, based off of games they've won and lost. the adjusted prediction would be 10-7. Yeah, I mean, I'm still going to keep it the same. And then on the road against Green Bay, and that one's one that... Yeah, see, I don't know. Again, I do expect by the end of the season, the Ravens are going to have turned some of these around, and they're going to have gotten some things going. And again, they're going to be desperately fighting to get into the playoffs. I mean, at this point, I think it's doubtful that they actually make it in, but they're going to be fighting for it, and I think they're going to be in a lot of shootouts trying to get in, and I think they may end up just barely falling short this year of making the playoffs, which is crazy for a team led by John Harbaugh and Lamar Jackson, but they've obviously got a lot of issues, especially on defense. So I don't think it's going to be enough for the Ravens. I will say we'll leave this the same for the Ravens at the moment, and we'll say that they get the upset. No, I can't do it. I'm flipping that as a loss. I'm flipping that as a loss for the Ravens in Lambeau. It'll be late in the season. It'll be cold. I mean, the Ravens are a cold weather team as well, but I mean, Lambeau is different, obviously. And the Packers, I think, are they're certainly not a perfect team. But yeah, I think I've got a little bit more faith in the Packers. That would take them to 12-4-1. And that would sit the Ravens at 8-9. So a losing record for the Ravens, which honestly, I think is possible. And that would put the AFC North, my predictions at the moment, sit at 9-8 for the Steelers, 8-9 for both the Ravens and the Bengals, and then a 4-13 for the Browns. So, yeah, I think the AFC North this year is going to be, maybe a little bit more closer to 500 for some of these teams here. The Steelers do have a schedule that's starting to toughen up here, coming down the stretch. So I still think I think the Steelers are going to lose some. If not, they're going to really have to have Lady Luck on their side health-wise, which, so far, hey, to their credit, in the AFC North, that's another interesting thing. The Steelers, led by a 40-plus-year-old quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, are the only team that still have their starting quarterback playing coming out of Week 5. All the other teams, the Ravens, the Bengals, the Browns, have all had to go to backup quarterbacks. And even outside of injuries, Rodgers has been playing pretty well compared to the other quarterbacks through these few weeks. So, I am pretty impressed with Aaron Rodgers and what he's done this season. But, I still think the Steelers are a team that is, they're going to win some games. They've won some surprising ones, but they've also played some of these games so far this season, pretty close in a couple of them. They've looked dominant in others, and I do think the Steelers are going to continue to be surprisingly good. But again, I still think it's going to be a typical Steelers season. They're going to end somewhere between 9-8 and 10-7. So that's part of why I don't really feel like it's worthwhile to change my predictions for the Steelers. So with all that, I'm going to wrap up this video. It went pretty long, but I hope if you did enjoy, please leave a like rating on the video. Let me know down in the comment section down below what you think of these predictions and what I've changed. Where did I go wrong? What things should I have left as they were? Or, just let me know all your thoughts about that. Is there another team in the NFL that you think I should focus on as far as changing my predictions, or that you think I'm just, people love to tell others that they're wrong on the internet. So if I'm wrong about some, let me know. I'd love to discuss that down in the comments section. Of course, if you agree with me on anything, let me know as well. That's always fun to also have conversations about things that we agree on as well. But thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video.